Welcome, everybody, to my Palantir Q4 2023 ER Digest. Welcome to all the 500 new subscribers, which I'm very excited to have you on board. It's crazy how the newsletter has suddenly picked up in terms of growth, but thank you so much. I'm delighted to have you here, so thank you very much for joining me. Essentially, this quarter, Palantir seems to have finally figured out distribution, which is correlating and I think quite likely equating to a financial inflection point. In my original Palantir deep dive, I essentially explained that once the company figures out distribution, it can grow exponentially. Since 2021, my long-term Palantir thesis has been that once the company can seamlessly deploy its offerings, it eventually becomes a platform on which folks can build their companies on first. I believe digital twins, so Palantir's core offerings, will be essential for business in the future. When creating a company, people will create their digital twin before they do anything else, just like they create their Gmail account today, and I'm sure you can relate to that. As Palantir gets better at distributing/deploying, contribution margin rises exponentially, reaching a maximum once the cost of deployment is marginal. At that point, Palantir becomes a network that reduces OpEx as a percentage of revenue for all participating enterprises, just like electricity. Although Palantir has not filled its 10K form for fiscal year 2023 just yet, we can see that contribution margin has been trending up recently. From Q4 2020 to Q3 2022, it trended down because the company was adding smaller clients to its customer base, but now it's ticking back up even as Palantir continues to add small clients. When I first invested in Palantir, I could not quite foresee how the company would go about fixing distribution, but the mental models that I used to analyze companies enabled me to understand that Palantir's odds of figuring it out were actually high. And incidentally, if you want to learn about these mental models and you want to learn how to analyze companies in depth like I do, check out my 2-hour deep dive course, which is discounted from $199 to $150 for 72 hours only. So now's a great time to buy. Palantir has been dabbling in its AIP bootcamps since this fall. In Q4, it seems that these bootcamps drove much more efficient distribution. For context, Palantir conducted 100 pilots in the whole of 2022. Since introducing AIP last year in October, the company has performed more than 500 bootcamps. And so the resulting acceleration in the US commercial business is tangible, as you can see in this graph. Growth from this period to this period was 8%, 4%, 12%, and then all of a sudden 22%. So definitely the company is now doing something right. And if you look at the commercial revenue growth metric, both globally and for the US, the acceleration is also quite noteworthy. Going forward, I believe Palantir will actually productize their bootcamps, gradually decreasing the marginal cost of each one over time. As they get cheaper to operate and Palantir can increase the number of bootcamps operated per day, the commercial business will grow faster and faster. Currently, the bootcamps require customers to travel to the location in question and engage with Palantir employees for days. Eventually, I believe customers will be able to do these bootcamps anywhere on a laptop. And at that point, distribution will be far similar to how Gmail does it. Here's a quote from Alex Karp, which I think communicates the spirit of the company at present, as it refers to distribution. We have a latent, nascent sales force that has put its tiny toe in the water and has noticed that it can move around. We have to build that into a strong, aggressive machine. I understand why many claim that we are in an AI bubble, but I believe such doomsayers have not studied the technology deeply enough. AI gives computers an entirely new skill set of transcendental importance. Now, AI is not going to do everything for us, but it allows us to use computers as prediction machines when previously we could only use them to store and share information. And now I'm going to explain why that is so fundamental. The economy essentially consists of 8 billion people processing information to optimize their operations. This is why the internet has created trillions of dollars in value, because it's allowed us to share information far more quickly and therefore ultimately take better decisions across the board. But AI is now tapping into our core wealth creation mechanism, which is making decisions, which is going to exponentiate the economic impact of computers. We can't offload all judgment to AI, but we will certainly hand over to the system a growing share of the decisions that we take. In turn, generative AI enables us to evolve from retrieval methods to generative methods, We no longer have to spend hours clicking and typing. We can just ask computers questions in natural language. The combination then of commoditized predictions and generative methods will equate to readily available automated intelligence in any connected device. This sounds distant and it sounds somewhat fiction. And it definitely sounded like fiction, I think, when I first wrote about this a few years ago. But now it is actually what AIP bootcamp attendants are already experiencing. See this quote from the CTO during the Q4 call. At a recent 2-day bootcamp with a construction, engineering, and architecture company, our customer developed a production-ready use case that provided $10 million of savings. And then he goes on to explain how AIP basically did all the work that otherwise a bunch of analysts would be doing. And so in this case, AIP certainly isn't making the final decision for anyone, but it is making redundant, perhaps not a series of jobs, but a part of those jobs. And I think it's pushing the people that would otherwise be doing those jobs far out into the creative realm. In the same manner, Palantir software seems to be making the NHS in the UK much more efficient. And here's a quote from Ryan Taylor, which I found interesting. For example, at Chelsea and Westminster NHS Foundation Trust, it helped bring down the inpatient waiting list by 28% and operation cancelled on the day due to missed preoperative assessments, subsequently by half. So that's very impressive performance, and it seems like it's not exactly hype. It's basically just organizations reducing the OpEx percentage of revenue. On a similar note, Palantir is turning its government business into a platform. Palantir's government business has always been a blind spot for me, and I ultimately invested in the company in spite of it. Over time, however, I've gained an appreciation for Palantir's ability to execute in the public sector. Although I think the vast majority of the upside going forward will come from the commercial operations, I now think the government business is on the doorstep of an operating leverage expansion. Palantir is making its Gotham, Gaia, and Meta Constellation offerings available via a platform that allows other companies to build on top of this platform. This enables defense companies to focus on driving innovation rather than the plumbing. This is a fundamentally different approach to selling the solutions directly to governments, which allows Palantir to position itself as an infrastructure provider in the defense industry. I believe that over time, this will smooth out the sales cycle. During times in which governments are not buying, Palantir can still sell to players in the defense industry. This distribution format also increases optionality. Some of the solutions built on its platform may succeed disproportionately over time, obviously benefiting Palantir. In my Q3 2023 digest, I argued that Palantir's rapid growth in the healthcare sector, together with rapid progress on the AIP front, was indicative of commensurate distribution advancements. And now I see that as materializing across the board. When I wrote my AIP, my UiPath deep dive, I was concerned that Palantir was losing out on distribution, but now I see the whole organization focused correctly towards solving this problem, and also, of course, maintaining the focus on improving the underlying offerings. This quote from Shyam Sankar, the CTO, was very telling of the company's recently acquired attitude. We continue to focus on accelerating the rate of bootcamps with current and prospective customers. What's very exciting about this earnings call is that for the first time, very tangibly so, the qualitative development of the company is translating into the financials. And so what we see is basically improving unit economics, which in turn is trickling down into the cash flow statement. Palantir is producing much more cash flow, and the balance sheet was already strong, but now this expanding unit economic scenario is making the balance sheet even stronger. So Palantir's distribution leap parallels the evolution of its gross margin and the key financial metrics from which it emerges. In the last few quarters, Palantir's cash flow seems to have been enhanced. So in the graph that I'm showing in the screen, you can see how revenue ticks up quite interestingly in the past few quarters. OpEx, perhaps not so much, but definitely the uptick is much more visible at the cash flow level. And you can see how cash from operations and free cash flow are definitely, I'd say, spiking up, at least. And this is interesting in that, of course, the company has been tightening its belt. And you can see that OpEx as a percentage of revenue has decreased quarter over quarter, 2.17%. So that definitely helps cash flow production. But essentially, I believe that a large part of this uptick in the cash flow is coming from improved unit economics. And this is evident, of course, per the rising gross margins. Quarter over quarter, they've jumped from 80.66% to 82.16%. So that tells you that Palantir's cost of doing business is going lower. And while revenue is going up, cost of business is going lower. You can just see throughout all of the financials that the operating leverage is going up. In turn, the improved unit economics, or seemingly improved unit economics, also coincide with an acceleration in customer acquisition. Overall customer count is up 10% quarter over quarter, which I find quite impressive. And it's, of course, a meaningful acceleration versus the prior quarters. You can see this in the graph that I'm showing in the screen now. Generally, I believe that the evidence for improved distribution is substantial. Of course, we can't call this a win just yet, but I think the company is definitely getting better at selling. And once Palantir's 10K is live, I would not be surprised to see contribution margin, the metric that I was referring to at the beginning of this write-up, and that basically my whole thesis of this company revolves around. And I wouldn't be surprised to see it ticking up for Q4 2023. Meanwhile, Palantir's GAAP profitability continues its positive trend, which you can see in the graph on the screen now, and the company remains eligible to join the S&P 500. The balance sheet remains very, very strong with no debt and over $3.6 billion in cash. And of course, I think that this picture is worth 1,000 words or perhaps even more. As a conclusion, in the past, I've been fairly critical of management's upbeat tone paired with seemingly no progress on the distribution side. However, AIP bootcamp anecdotes and favorably evolving metrics suggest that they had a reason to be excited. I believe that from here, Palantir's customer centricity and pace of iteration will soon help transform the company into a distribution machine. Meanwhile, they'll continue to improve the underlying offerings, which I'm sure they won't really take their eyes off at the moment. Financials should then improve in tandem. And what's exciting here is that with just 500 customers in total, Palantir has a very, very long runway ahead. In the coming year or so, as distribution efficiency continues to rise, I also believe we will see Palantir kickstart its valuable compute flywheel, which, as some of you know, I think is the most interesting part of the thesis, whereby Palantir deploys its software across different industries, and as it penetrates these industries, it gains more and more intelligence regarding the different businesses within each industry, and eventually it can deploy tailored computation to each of its customers, which is a fundamentally different way to sell compute to that of the mainstream market at the moment. People buy computation and then they tailor it via code. Palantir is positioned to sell compute that is directly tailored to the operations, and that is a fundamental shift in how computing is sold worldwide. And that's how I think long-term Palantir can become a trillion-dollar company or even more, because in a decade or 2 decades' time, being a trillion-dollar company might not be as big a deal as it is today. And of course, when we have a company that redefines how computation is sold, and it is the basis for the deployment of AI across industry, then we obviously have something that's quite interesting. And a trillion-dollar market cap in a decade or 2 is perhaps not too much of a crazy idea. So I hope that you enjoyed the update. If you did, please share this with one friend. That would be of great help. These updates are for free, just as the deep dives. So the only way this grows is with your help. So thank you very much for joining me, and until next time.